Everything you've been taught about Judgment Day is probably wrong. Not because your pastor lied to you, but because most churches teach Judgment Day as one event, one moment, one throne, one verdict. But the Bible describes at least 3 separate judgments, 3 different events, 3 different groups of people. And if you confuse them, you'll misunderstand your own eternity. So I'll show you what the Bible actually says, verse by verse. Open almost any church service next Sunday and ask 20 people what Judgment Day is. You'll get 20 slightly different answers. Some will say it's when Jesus returns. Some will say it's when the dead rise. Some will say it's the sheep and the goats. Some will point to Revelation and the great white throne. Here's the problem. All of those are in the Bible, and they're not the same event. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 10 says, "We must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ." Matthew chapter 25 says Jesus will separate the nations like a shepherd separates sheep from goats. Revelation chapter 20 says, "I saw a great white throne, and the dead were judged according to what they had done." 3 different scenes, 3 different descriptions, 3 different outcomes. For 1700 years, theologians have debated how these fit together. Some say they're the same event from different angles. Others say they're sequential, separate judgments spread across time. Today, I'm going to walk you through the second view, the one most seminaries teach, but most pulpits never explain. And by the end, you'll understand which judgment applies to you. The first judgment in the biblical timeline is called the judgment seat of Christ. In Greek, the bema seat. The word bema is important because it's not a courtroom. It's an award ceremony. In ancient Greece and Rome, the bema was an elevated platform where judges handed out prizes to athletes after the games. Paul, who wrote 2 Corinthians, lived in a world where his readers saw bema seats every year. When he used that word, they understood what he meant. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 10 says, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive what is due for what he has done in the body, whether good or evil." Now read that carefully. Paul is writing to Christians, believers, followers of Jesus. This verse is about them. 1 Corinthians chapter 3 goes even further. Paul says every believer's work will be tested by fire. What survives earns a reward. What burns is lost. But listen to verse 15. "If anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire." Read that twice. The person's work might be destroyed, but they are still saved. This is critical. The judgment seat of Christ is not about whether you go to heaven or hell. It's about rewards for believers who are already saved. The New Testament actually mentions 5 different crowns believers can receive at the bema seat. The crown of life, the crown of righteousness, the crown of glory, the incorruptible crown, the crown of rejoicing. Revelation chapter 4 verse 10 shows something remarkable. The 24 elders cast their crowns before the throne of God, which means whatever rewards believers earn, they ultimately give back in worship. So here's judgment number 1, the bema seat, believers only. Rewards, not salvation. Happens after the rapture, before the second coming, according to the most common timeline. But if this is just for believers, what about everyone else? That brings us to judgment number 2. And this is where most Christians get confused. Matthew chapter 25 verse 31. "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats." Most people read this and assume it's Judgment Day. One throne, one final verdict, heaven or hell. But look closer. This judgment happens at a specific moment when the Son of Man comes in his glory. That's the second coming. Not the end of the world. Not after the 1,000-year reign, the second coming. And look at who is judged. Not the resurrected dead, not believers receiving rewards. Jesus says the nations, living people, those who survive the tribulation period. The criteria is also specific. Jesus says, and I'm quoting, "I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me." The sheep, the ones Jesus welcomes, ask when they did this. Jesus answers, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me." Here's where it gets interesting. The phrase "my brothers" is debated by scholars. Many believe Jesus is specifically referring to the Jewish people, his ethnic brothers, who suffer intensely during the tribulation period. Others think he means all Christians. Others still think he means the needy in general. But the structure of the judgment is clear. It's about how the surviving nations treated God's people during the tribulation. Sheep enter the millennial kingdom. Goats are sent to eternal punishment. Notice what's not happening here. This isn't about every human who ever lived. It's about those alive at the second coming. It's not the bema seat. It's not the great white throne. Judgment number 2, the sheep and goats, the living nations, at the second coming, entry into the 1,000-year kingdom, or eternal separation. But the biggest judgment, the one most people are actually thinking of when they say Judgment Day, hasn't happened yet. Revelation chapter 20, verse 11. "Then I saw a great white throne and him who was seated on it. From his presence earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them." Stop. Read that again. Earth and sky fled away. This isn't a judgment on earth. This happens after earth itself is gone. John's vision places this after the 1,000-year reign of Christ, after Satan's final rebellion, after the old heavens and earth are destroyed, before the new heaven and new earth are revealed. Verse 12, "And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books according to what they had done. There are two sets of books at this judgment, the books of deeds at every action recorded, and the book of life containing the names of the redeemed." Verse 15 is devastating. "And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire." Here's where it gets uncomfortable. The great white throne is not a trial in the modern sense. It's not a debate. It's not an appeal. The books are already written. The verdict is already clear. The question isn't whether someone is guilty. It's whether their name is in the other book. And this is the part most pastors soften. The great white throne is specifically for those not already resolved in earlier resurrections. This is the final judgment of everyone whose destiny was not resolved before. Judgment number 3, the great white throne. The final resurrection. Every remaining soul across history, judged by their works and by whether their name is in the book of life. So now you see the 3 judgments. And now the question is the one that matters. Which judgment applies to you? If you are a believer in Jesus Christ, someone whose name is already written in the book of life, you will stand at the bema seat, not to determine your salvation. That was settled at the cross, but to receive reward or suffer loss based on how you lived. If you survive the tribulation period as a living human at the moment of Christ's return, you will stand among the nations. Sheep or goat, entry into the kingdom or exclusion. And if you die without Christ, if your name is not in the book of life, you will stand at the great white throne. And the books will be opened, and every act will be weighed. Here's what this means practically. 1. There is no single judgment day. There are at least 3, probably more depending on how you count the resurrection sequences. 2. Mixing them up has real consequences. If you think the bema seat is about heaven or hell, you'll live in fear. If you think the great white throne is for everybody, you'll misunderstand grace. 3. The Bible is more specific than most preaching makes it sound. Every judgment has a different group, a different location, a different purpose. And the difference matters. The church has had 2,000 years to get this right. Some traditions have, many haven't. And that's why most Christians, when asked about Judgment Day, give answers that blend 3 separate biblical events into one. You don't have to make that mistake anymore. If this file changed how you read Revelation, wait until you see the next one. Because long before Revelation was written, there was another book that described the Day of Judgment in terrifying detail. A book quoted by Jesus' own brother in the New Testament. A book the church tried to suppress in 363 AD. A book called the Book of Enoch. That's the next file. Dropping Monday. Subscribe so you don't miss it. One question for you. Drop it in the comments. Which judgment surprised you most? The bema seat, the sheep and goats, or the great white throne? This has been the Jesus Files. Stay curious.